Not everyone loves math. So it's a true joy to spend time with those who do, peeking into the mystery and wonder of the order and beauty that math can reveal, can really change our perspective and help us teach our children to appreciate the subject at a higher level. Susan Sutcher is here today to open our eyes to mathematics outside the box.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and today we're talking with Susan Sutcher about mathematics outside the box. Susan Sutcher is a Chestertonian distributist. She has homeschooled for over 20 years and was an actuary prior to staying home with her children. Her husband, Greg, and she live in the Washington, D.C. area with 8 of their 9 children, a dog, and half a dozen chickens. Her current project is a book on Catholic chaplains in various American wars, and you can find Susan's blog at returntosanity.substack.com. That's in our show notes. And if you have questions or follow up with Susan, she's at susansutcher@gmail.com, susansucher@gmail.com. And that's also in the show notes. Susan, thank you so much in the midst of your very busy life for making time for this conversation today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love to talk about math. I love to talk about homeschooling, and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Because I actually really loved math as a kid. And I loved, I would make up my own math problems and, I was very geeky. But I never had the experience that I feel like you stand for of going beyond just the math that we've all kind of learned in school. So I'd like to just start with where your love for math began. Would you just give us a window?
I think my love for math began with my parents. At a very early age, my father was an early adopter of technology. He was a fire controlman in the Navy, and so he used math in his job. He never considered himself a mathematician because he wasn't really on the college track. So he thought he couldn't do algebra. He thought all of these things, but this is a man who sat me down when I was about 7 years old and sat on his lap and taught me SOHCAHTOA, the right triangle trig, and the ratios. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That's so, and then ka, and then toa. And just, he used that as a matter of course. So he didn't think that was trigonometry. He didn't consider that to be mathematics. He just saw that in relation to what he was doing as a missile technician, as somebody who worked on complicated equipment for the military. He also was really into computers very early. So when I was 5 years old, I inherited the family's old Apple II computer. And I had it in my bedroom, and, I'd break into the machine code and I'd see the hexadecimal number system coming up. And Dad taught me, well, what does that mean? And we have got digits from 0 up to F, and that F means 15, and understanding that even our base 10 number system was kind of limiting, that there were other ways to talk about numbers, a binary system. And so it really gave me this perspective. I learned how to program in BASIC very early. So I was going beyond just your basic arithmetic and algebra already. And then, my parents fought hard to get a good education for me. They put me into a gifted curriculum. And this was before we had our the system we have now, this Common Core kind of idea, where there's certain things we need to teach. And we've enumerated all of the things that are important. Which I guess might be good as a foundation, but sometimes all the other things get lopped off because all we're evaluating is the things that are on the list. Well, I was fortunate to be educated before that system came into place, and I was in a program where we learned mathematics by using packets. And I would learn first, we'd go through the system, and once we learned something, once we mastered it, we didn't have to go back and do it again. All right. Well, by the time I was in 5th grade, I finished all the packets, all right, that they had through 6th grade. So sixth grade, they said, well, we don't have anything to do with you. You've designed your own packet. You've learned all of these like extra topics that we've given you, logic problems and magic squares and Roman numerals and base number systems. And so we'll send you off to high school for algebra. And I just always loved it. I had a passion for mathematics, and a system like this worked really well for me, because if I had been put into a typical system where I had been said, okay, we're going to start over the year again. And every time you start a new math book, you start back at addition and then your subtraction. And then you might do division just slightly more complicated than you did last year, but we're going through the same things for 9 years, kindergarten through 8th grade. It just gets slightly more complex each year. And children frequently don't get the opportunity to do some of the things that I did with mathematics. I think part of the beauty of homeschooling is that we can take advice from the typical system, and we can make sure that we cover our bases, but we can go so much further beyond, and we can have the type of freedom and education that those teachers that I enjoyed in the public school they gave to me. We may have the same quality teachers in the public schools now, and I believe we do. I believe we have dedicated professionals, but they are constrained by a system that doesn't allow them to do what these teachers did for me, which was to design a curriculum that inspired wonder and inquiry. And they're not allowed to do that in the same way anymore. And it's a shame, but we are not constrained by that system as homeschoolers. Yay. We can be outside of it. So that's my main point. And what I really want other parents to know is that you don't have to be constrained by the system. You can be outside of the system, and your child that doesn't enjoy mathematics, you can take a step back. Because as John Taylor Gatto points out, it takes about 100 hours to learn everything that a child needs to learn in K-8 mathematics that's on that scope and sequence from the Common Core. So a lot of this extra time that we're spending in mathematics instruction in the public school is just redundant, and it's reductive. And that's where the children start to feel the grind, and they feel like this isn't fun, and they feel like this is boring, because you know what? It is.
Right.
So who can blame them? Who can blame them? And sometimes if a child's not developmentally ready to learn something, just pushing it, you're trying to put the square peg into the round hole. You're doing something that's just impossible. When the child's ready, the child will learn. And we have to trust that. We have to trust our own discernment, and we have to trust that, God's created this child to be able to learn. But sometimes we have to take a step back. I don't teach my children, my boys. I've got 7 boys and 2 girls. And I understand that boys develop fine motor skills later than girls do. I read a lot of great books by Leonard Sachs about that, about the differences between boys and girls. So we don't do handwriting. We don't do cursive until junior high. And then they love it because we can tie it into some medieval thing and, talk about knights or something. And, but when the child is ready, whether it's handwriting, mathematics, anything else, they'll be receptive and able to learn. And we don't have to make things difficult just for the sake of checking off a box. So I think getting creative with state requirements. Yes, we have to have mathematics, but do we have to have the mathematics they're doing down the street at the public school? Maybe not. Maybe we can get into some other topics that might inspire and get our children excited about mathematics, or at least not make them think it's a drudge.
Right. It's almost like we could be building cathedrals and making great works of art and climbing mountains and doing all kinds of incredible adventures, but we only teach them about the hiking boot or the paintbrush or the most rudimentary, necessary, useful things, but we don't allow them to see the bigger picture. We don't invite them into the delight, awe, and wonder that you've been able to experience and pass along to your children. So would you step us into some of the areas of interest around mathematics that are, as we're saying, outside the box is a little bit of a cliche, but what are some areas that you'd love to invite people to explore?
one of the best things about mathematics is when we apply it to the natural world. So very early on in my mathematics instruction, actually, I have a recommendation. There is a movie, and now you can find it on YouTube. It's called Donald Duck in Mathemagic Land. And it is an absolute delight. Imagine it's in the same style as Fantasia. And it goes through all the way from Pythagoras. It talks about golden ratios. Golden ratios are based on the Fibonacci numbers. Now, Fibonacci numbers, the first number is 1 and the second number is 1. We've just kind of defined that, right? So that's where you start. And then each number that follows is the sum of the preceding two numbers. So if 1 and 1, then we've got 2. And then the next number would be 2 plus 1, and that's 3. And then 3 plus 2 is 5. Okay, 5 plus 3 is 8. And on and on and on. So this is a very useful sequence of numbers, and it's something we find reflected in nature. So we see this in a pine cone. The way that pine cones have, sort of like stacked on top of one another, we'll see those same types of ratios. Well, it turns out that we see the fractions, okay, like 5/8. When you look at the human body, the ratios of the head to the torso, and you look especially at Greek sculpture, they understood these ratios and they're pleasing to the eye. So there's something about that resonates with our soul. Yeah. And it's something that is kind of a mystery, but we see it in the architecture of the universe. And so that's why certain rectangles look beautiful or they look attractive to us. And then some might look way too skinny and tall or fat and stubby. So there's sort of a perfect rectangle in your mind if you imagine a rectangle. And that's going to have a ratio that's about the golden ratio.
Wow.
It's phenomenal. It's a crazy thing that we are tuned into that. But the same thing happens with music. Gregorian chant has frequencies. Now, frequency, that's all mathematics, right? Because that's how many times per second something is vibrating, gives you the different tones. And so all of those things relate to just order in the universe, order in our souls. An octave, when you go up one octave on our scale, you're going to double the frequency. Isn't that great? It's a beautiful symmetry in the world. So there's symmetries everywhere. There's these golden ratios. If you look at a conch shell, these same ratios come out. So, and then even when you go down into the cellular level, and then you get into the idea of fractals. That's sort of like a pattern that repeats itself larger and larger. But when you zoom in on a fractal, you'll see the same thing as when you zoom out, because these types of patterns repeat themselves in nature. And then mathematics imitates nature. And it really can be this inspiring and beautiful thing. I think that sometimes it might be useful to step away from the typical mathematics and spend some time, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, find mathematics in nature, apply mathematics, go get a snap circuit set and do some electronics, and then talk about the math, but start with the fun. Let's make the light bulb light up. Let's figure out how to do that. And then let's go back and see if we can figure out the math that went along with it and see how it's useful. Yeah. It's useful at the grocery store because we can figure out what 20% off is, but money's money. Let's talk about some other things, especially, actiony boys, people, they want to build robots. They want to do things. Who wants to sit when you're 8 years old in a desk filling out 100 math problems all in a row? I don't want to do that now. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I love math, but I don't want to sit there and do 100 arithmetic problems all in a row. Mm-hmm. Now I understand the value of memorizing math facts. That's like learning the alphabet. That's great. Yes, we do want to learn the alphabet, but you don't want to learn the alphabet over and over and over for 9 years in a row. Mm-hmm. You might think the alphabet was boring.
Right? And never create a line of poetry or a beautiful letter to someone you love, or even read great works.
Yes. We've really taken math and sort of done the equivalent of just forcing people to do Dick and Jane for most of their academic career. And it's really a shame that most people can't get into the fun stuff until they decide to major in math in college. But by that point, probably 75% of the population has dropped out and thinks they don't like math. It's too late. It's too late to wait until college to get into combinatorics, to get into statistics, to get into other geometries, to really open your mind to this whole other world, this whole other way of thinking about things. So I think a lot of the people who really don't like mathematics, either, they haven't been exposed to the more interesting stuff, and they're probably pretty deep thinkers. They're probably people who want to go beyond just a mechanical task of doing, taking things from one bucket and putting them into the other, which is sometimes how we reduce math into this very, something that, why do I need to learn this? I can plug this into my calculator. Well, absolutely. But can your calculator contemplate the beauty of the universe? No, it can't. So, so we need to teach math with soul, and we need to teach math like it matters and like it describes God's universe, which in fact it does. It's a useful tool for that.
Yeah. And I love what you said too about that our souls recognize certain relative ratios, things like that, that there's something in our design that resonates with the design of the rest of God's creation. And I've read numerous times about scientists who, as they've explored the universe, especially astrophysicists, where the math converts them to belief in a designer because the incomprehensible, mutually, interdependent conditions that have to be present, they're all there in the math for anything to exist, never mind life in all its complexity. It's mind-boggling. And they start to see the hand of the designer. And so there are more and more deists in science and math because our math has gotten so advanced that it's becoming unmistakably designed. And so I feel like there's a whole element to exploring this with our souls and our hearts, as well as our logical and technical minds, which is also exciting, that can take us closer to God and perhaps help us to bring others closer to God. I want to continue on this thread and get to some other topics, but we're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors at Homeschool Connections. We're here with Susan Sutcher, and we're talking about mathematics outside the box. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, we are back with Susan Sutcher, and we are talking about mathematics outside the box. And we've touched on so many beautiful things: the creation, the soul, the things that resonate with us naturally. And there are places, as you mentioned before we hit record, where we can connect math with other topics. And you have a favorite. Could you tell us where you're seeing kind of a fun connection?
Well, I love the work of Lewis Carroll. So we all know that he wrote Alice in Wonderland, and we enjoy his fantastic style and his creatures. And he was also a mathematician. His name is Lewis Carroll's his pen name. He's Charles Dodgson. He was a mathematics professor at Oxford. He was home educated until he was 12 years old. And his instruction until then was primarily literature. He had a huge reading list. And then he went off to school. And then he started his mathematics journey with a solid foundation. And he ended up just an amazing logician. He ended up with some proofs in some innovative ways that nobody had ever looked at the problem. And I think that's really the difference. When we get into mathematics at a higher level, what we're doing is not just taking things from one bucket and putting them into the next. We're looking at a puzzle. We're looking at a problem, and we're trying to take a different approach. We can use deductive reasoning. We can use inductive reasoning. We can use logical tools to approach problems. And then our mathematics is really like, those are the screwdrivers and the hammers. Those are the tools, but they're not really the process. So the process of mathematics is something more philosophical. It's something more logical. It's something that has a great connection with our literary minds, with our ability to think about things like infinity. We can think about things that are so big they can't fit inside our heads. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that is one of the signs that points to the creator, is that there are things we can imagine such a thing that doesn't even fit inside of our head. Right. This type of exploration, this type of thing is going to encourage children to see mathematics as something worthy of pursuit. I think we can inspire them to see literature, see a world that's larger. Well, let's make sure that we understand too that mathematics goes right along with that. You know, mathematics can describe astronomical things. Mathematics can help us predict. This is how they knew planets existed before they could see them with a telescope. They would analyze the orbit of other planets and see, oh, well, I think there's another gravitational force. There must be a large body that's affecting this and making this more of an ellipse than a circular thing that we might predict if we didn't have something else pulling on the planet. So we could predict the presence of some of the outer planets before we could even see them. What a beautiful thing. So mathematics has a lot more than what we've offered. So Lewis Carroll, oh my gosh, he's got these word problems. There's a book. It's available online. It's called A Tangled Tale. It's collected in a compilation called Logical Nonsense. That's everything that he ever did. Well, the first half of the book, you've got Alice in Wonderland, you've got Jabberwocky, you've got all of these fantastic things you're probably familiar with. But there's a whole section in his canon of logical syllogism, symbolic logic, and he's super creative with it. So in his math problems where he calls them knots, right? We want to entangle a knot, a puzzle. And there's knights going up and down hills. There's mythical creatures. He takes that element of fantasy and makes it super fun. We don't have to make math boring. I mean, we can make math boring. We certainly could pick up almost any textbook and find a way to make math boring. But there are resources out there to help make math exciting. There's, I think sometimes, unfortunately, I think we have to reach back before the Common Core helped us to narrow the field of mathematics into something that's really reductive. The problem with doing that is that we can create people who are decent technicians, but we're not creating people who can really do what we have to do, which is to think outside the box. If we're going to really solve the mathematical problems, if we're going to find innovative ways to prove something new, if we're going to talk about the edges of science where we're getting into smaller and smaller particles, we really need to be able to think about ways in a more philosophical way, in a way outside of just this taking things from one bucket and putting them into the next bucket. So Carroll is a great introduction into that because he really enjoyed mathematics. He loved playing with numbers. He loved the whimsy. You know, as you can see, when you read Alice in Wonderland, lots of whimsy, lots of joy. So for the reticent child, for the reticent adult, you know, who may think they don't like mathematics, I challenge you first as the parent to try your best to put aside the prejudice that was rightly created in you towards mathematics by maybe this sort of routinized grind that you felt about mathematics in your education, and consider that there might be another way. Because that's one of the big problems, is that we take our prejudices and even unconsciously transfer them to our students. Many of the people who are teaching mathematics to children in a public school, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they don't like math. If they liked math, they'd probably be an engineer or a chemist or something else, right? But they're an elementary school teacher. So usually, not always, but typically, they think math is awful. So they teach it to the kids and they're like, the kids don't enjoy it. And they're like, yeah, I didn't either. And sometimes we as homeschooling parents can do that too. So that's frequently, the question, how are you going to teach them upper level math? How are you going to teach them science? These are the things that people think are outside the realm of most people. But I encourage you to take a little time, grab a logic puzzle book, grab some Lewis Carroll. A lot of this stuff is available. It's in the public domain. You can find it for free online, and read through it and try to spark some joy for yourself. Look into mathematics and nature. Try to find it when you go. Take your kids to the seashore, pick up a shell and talk about the ratios. Get a little ruler, measure things. Try to see if you can find some of these golden ratios out there. And really try to spark that joy for yourself, because and then if you're doing something with your kids in math, or really in any subject, this is my opinion, and everybody's struggling and everybody hates it and you want to throw in the towel, the best choice sometimes is to throw in the towel. Take a new tack. You have these children. God has entrusted them to you. You will have them likely in your home until they're 18, maybe even a little bit longer. I have a few that are a little bit longer. That's okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't all have to happen right now. And if your third grader hasn't slogged through a third grade math book, it's okay. There will be a chance. And the fourth grade math book is just a little bit different than the third grade math book. So you could even take some time off and do some fun math, do some graphing, there's so many things out there that you could try. You could look into, the nature. You could look into some logic problems. You could do some puzzles. Puzzling is a great way to learn about mathematics, and you could sneak it in stealth. Get a book of 500 logic problems and then have them work through them. They have them at an easy level, and then they can get a little bit more advanced. There's something called a magic square. Figure out how to put numbers in so they all add up. These things get the brain working, get the logical side of things working, but can sometimes look more like fun than like filling out a whole worksheet of problems. And once your child knows the basic facts, you need to consider how many problems do they need to do without applying them to something. I think when people find things useful, they're more likely to want to do them. So that's a big important thing for me. So.
And when they touch on their imagination too, you mentioned something to me. You said it was an animated film created in the 1960s that had some nice wonder and intriguing ideas in it. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that resource?
Oh, well, yes. Donald Duck and Math Magic Lands is a great resource. I love. It was published about the same time as Fantasia, which so it has that very magical sort of trippy kind of aesthetic, that you would expect from something made in the 60s. And Donald Duck travels back through time and he sees Pythagoras, and we learn about the Pythagorean theorem, but from Pythagoras himself, and then we learn about the golden ratios, and we see things in nature and in a way that really only an animation can show those types of things. We learn about the Fibonacci numbers, and it really helps to bring some of those things alive. So it would be a great place to start. Get your kids interested, excited, and then go try to find some of those ratios yourself out in nature. Go to the museum. Check out the sculptures. Do they have the ratios? Prove it. Figure it out. Go, and then maybe make your own art. Maybe make some art and break the rules and don't use the ratios, and then make some and use the ratios and see, have a blind judging, similar quality of technique, but different ratios, and see which one appeals to a random audience more. These types of things. I think that helps too. Mathematics ends up pointing us to the creator. Heisenberg was a scientist, and he said that the first drink from the cup of natural science will make you an atheist, but when you get down to the last dregs, you find God.
Wow.
And I think that's where we get a little bit deeper. I think if we're mathematics is a natural science, and if you're just doing the rudimentary things, the things that a calculator could do, the things that a robot could do, it's hard to find God in just slogging through 100, math facts. I'm sorry. That just it seems very reductive. But when we get to those things our calculator can't do, when we start to think about the philosophy of mathematics, when we look at the logic, when we look at the reasoning, right? These are things that point us to a creator. So you can find that order of the universe. You can contemplate infinities. You can contemplate greater things through mathematics, but you've got to get outside of that box. You can't treat your kids like they're little robots, because they're not. They have souls. And mathematics is not something that has to be this lower thing. Mathematics, queen of the sciences. It's a beautiful thing. It's something, I love it. It's something you can sink your teeth into. It's something solid. It's something that undergirds the universe, really. The geometries of the cells, the geometries of plants, of animals. It's so many beautiful symmetries in the universe. And then when we look out into the larger universe, when we look out into planetary science, we really see some beautiful combinations of different types of mathematics. So I think most children can learn to love mathematics, and even most adults could learn to love mathematics if they took it outside of its little box and really allowed themselves to see that it's much more than just a pipeline that starts with addition and subtraction and ends at calculus. All right. This is only one way of describing things, and it's not even the most interesting way.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, it really is so exciting. And one of the things that was coming to mind as you were talking about that in the order of the universe is that I feel like God, over time, he has created this almost Easter egg hunt effect of, as the math advances, as the science advances, we get to discover him more and more further into the universe. An example is the Hubble space images of the Whirlpool galaxy. And there's a black hole that they've detected at the center of that galaxy through math. But visually, they've detected intersecting dust rings at its core that make the shape of a cross.
Oh.
And just another reminder that he's planted these little things for us to discover in awe and wonder. And as you said, things that are, we say seen and unseen in our creed, like the visible and the invisible, like some of those things are yet to be revealed. And so this awe and wonder is so exciting. You mentioned a book by Harold Jacobs that you liked as a resource. You want to say a couple of words about that?
Sure. It's called Mathematics as a Human Endeavor. And I love it because its subtitle is Math for people who think they don't like math. And he goes into so many topics. And this would be a nice break. If you are slogging through those books and you've got a kid that's really doesn't seem like they're interested, I would start maybe in middle school, early high school with this book. And I just love that he talks about things like tessellations. Everybody loves the work of M.C. Escher. He has these stairs that seem to go up and down, and he also does these ones that are tessellations. You might remember one that's birds turning into fish. And a tessellation is basically a geometric shape when repeated, which covers a plane, which covers the whole space with no spaces in between, right? So there are ways even that you can create your own tessellations. You start with a shape that tessellates the plane. You cut something out of one side and glue it on the other side, and that shape will still tessellate the plane. So that was something fun in this great gifted education that I had that I learned how to do. It's a project that I've done in co-ops and with my own children. And then you can get creative. I'm not the best artist, but some people make theirs look like rocket ships, and they make them look, and then your rocket ships can tessellate the plane, or any various numbers of images can be created that way. So that's a good intersection of art and mathematics with Escher. And then so that's on the cover of his book. But he's got combinatorics, which is, when you want to find out how many times something can happen. Let's say we've got a three-digit number. How many three-digit numbers are there if we don't repeat any numbers? And so those types of ideas, if I pick out jelly beans, what's the odds it's going to be something, and what's the odds the next one's going to be something? Those types of permutations, combinatorics, those are in there. Just a lot of topics that are going to be outside of your typical math textbook. And I think that it helps a child, it helps an adult to see that it's not just the same old slog. Now, I'll admit there are some people who love that stuff. I loved it. I could do math problems all day long when I was a kid. I just thought it was fun, just get it done. And, it was sort of like a meditative or soothing thing for me to just, sometimes repeat. I like to knit too. So that's the same thing over and over and over. So, some people, might enjoy that. But I think it's good even for the people who enjoy mathematics to also get outside the box. So if your kid really likes the system and you're grooving on the math 1, math 2, math 3, math 4 track, and that child is super happy, it might also be good to challenge them to get outside of their box, because maybe with their mathematical mind, if they also attach logic and philosophy, they could really become a powerhouse. And maybe they're going to be the one that's going to push the edges of science. And they're going to be the ones that's going to be able to take things to the next step, because now they have not only those solid basic math skills, but they've got the logic and the philosophy to come along beside it and really turn it into something very powerful to learn more about God's universe. So I recommend this type of approach for absolutely every kind of student.
All right. So good. Thank you so much, Susan. It's just been delightful and rich. And I feel like we could just talk all day about this, but I need to respect your time and let you get back to all the beautiful things that you're doing. Thank you so much for this discussion. Is there just any final thought you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I guess my thought would be, especially for parents who are newer to homeschooling, pray, trust the Holy Spirit, and don't worry. All right. God has given these children to you, and He will give you the graces to parent them, and He will give you the graces to educate them. So Trust that He knew what He was doing. Trust your own judgment and your own wisdom and your own discernment. After you've prayed, you pray with your spouse, you trust the graces of that sacrament, and then you go for it. And any course can be corrected. So these are not permanent. This does not have to go down in your permanent record. So I think we as homeschooling parents, as parents in general, the more that we rely on God, the more that we know we don't have all the answers, but that God is going to lead our paths, the more joy we can find in our homeschooling, and maybe even in mathematics.
All right. Amen. Amen. I feel like I'm hearing applause out there in the audience right now. So, anyway, everybody, please check out Susan's blog at returntosanity.substack.com. That's in our show notes. And you can email follow-up questions to Susan Sucher, SusanSucher @gmail.com. And we'll have a few other of the resources that she mentioned in the show notes. Again, thanks so much for listening, everybody. We are praying for you. Please pray for us too. Have a great day, and God bless you. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.